Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. It's pretty cold over here in Canada, so let's remove these extra coats and get started. Welcome to Battlebee Painting. Today we're going to be looking at painting Chief Librarian Tigurius from Games Workshop. So looking forward to painting this guy up. And just a little disclaimer, it's a little too cold outside, so typically I'd be priming him. But today we're going to be doing a bit of base coat on him with some Corax White instead, because it's minus 37 outside right now with the wind chill. A little too nippy. All right, well, catch you in the video. All right, here we have our lineup for paints for the flesh. So we have all these lined up. We got some layers, some shades, and some bases. Next, we have, of course, all the different parts that you'll need for painting your armor. So the blues, some gray, some null oil, because that stuff is great for getting in crevices. And then next we have, of course, our metals. So these ones will all be nice for some little details. And finally, we have our contrast paint lineup, which will be great for all those little tubes and piping going along our Chief Librarian's head. So now we have our bare plastic head here. So since it was too cold to spray paint outside, we're going to go ahead and give him a first coat here. So we're going to start off with, of course, our Corax White. So again, this is establishing that solid base for our paint to adhere on later on. So this really acts like a primer. And we're going to do 2 quick coats of this. And again, you can see me piling on pretty quickly here. Again, being messy at this stage is fine. Okay, after letting that dry for a little bit, we got our second coat coming on now. So again, this one here, trying to make sure nothing's really pooling in or bubbling up as we're going along. Want to make sure there's no air bubbles or things popping into crevices. So just going over that a few times, and there we have it. Now we're going to go ahead and apply our first layer for the flesh. So this one here is Bugman's Glow, a really good solid base color, especially if you're painting lighter flesh tones. So that's just being applied on, again making sure not to pool it too much in crevices and things like that, spreading out your paint evenly. Now we got Reikland Flesh Shade, just pulling that out. Going to go ahead and put that all over the face, and of course while we're doing this too, making sure it's not pooling too much, spreading it out into certain areas that we want it to go into. For instance, the side of the head, between the nose and the forehead. Now we're going to be doing a bit of highlighting now with Bugman's again. So we used that originally, and now we're just lighting up a certain couple areas, cheekbones, various things, kind of creating a mid-tone here for our face. Now here comes the highlighting portion of this. So we built up that mid-tone. Now we're going to add some highlights to various sections. So again, trying to pick out things like the wrinkles in his forehead, those stress lines, anything that kind of pops out, that's sticking out. So his nose and the lips. Can't forget that chin. I want to make sure we get all those little points out. You can really see the face starting to pop now at this point. Now it's time to mix some Cadian Flesh Tone with a bit of Corax White, so about 50-50 mix here. We're going to use that just to really pick out those highlighted areas. So for instance, the cheeks, the brow, the nose, the lips, and some of those forehead wrinkles. So next, of course, added a bit of Corax White just to the brush here, getting those eyes ready for the pupils later on. So again, that's the trickiest part. Have to switch to a finer brush. Now we're going to go ahead and do the pupils. So I took Lothran Blue for this. And you have to be very careful, steady your hand, and take your time. So now that we got those pupils finished, we're going to go ahead and add some null oil to make these lighter areas pop out. So again, around the eye sockets, around the nose, and of course by the chin, and some of those creases by the mouth. That will really help pop it out, along with areas around the side of the face. Now we're going to go ahead and do the teeth. So that was just with a bit of Corax white, straightforward. Again, you need that super fine detail brush. Now we have, of course, some Wazdaka red. We're using that with a mixture of Corax white as a color for the lips. If you find it's a little too pink, you can always go over it again with your mid-tone. Water it down a little bit, just like I'm doing here, just to remove some of that brightness. Next, we got the eyebrows. So I took Xandri Dust. I wanted to just give them a little bit of a definition there in the brow. And I found out a little too bright. So it looks like his eyebrows are really sticking out, which is fine, but off camera, it's a little too bright at this point. Now we have his eyebrows. He's looking pretty snazzy. Just to finish it off, go over his eyebrows with some skeletal horde. Just darken them just a tad. And there we go. So he's now all done. It's looking pretty good. Let's focus in on him. His eyebrows done. His face. So again, this is just adding a little bit of skeletal horde to that one section on his eyebrows, just to kind of darken it a little bit. And then I'll finish up the rest of his helmet. Here we go. Next we have the classic Macragge blue. That's being applied all over the different armor-plated areas of his helmet. So that's being all blopped onto there. Again, trying to be neat as to not touch the face. The hardest part was those little edge pieces, of course, by the skin. So those were, again, done with a smaller brush. And there we go. So next, we're looking at adding some basilicum gray to all of these armored areas. So that's getting into all the recesses and the cracks. So again, that will be kind of our shade, our darkness applied to our armor paneling. So where there is dark, there is light. We're going to next, of course, go back over these areas now that they've dried with, again, our Macragge blue, just popping out some areas. And we're going to do 50-50 mix with Lothran blue and our Macragge blue, and just starting to build up those highlights, making things pop. Again, those areas around the helmet, quite tricky to get by the skin. And then just finishing off with 100% Lothran blue on some specific parts that really pop, like the little edge pieces and highlighted parts of the armor that, again, pop up around his chin. Now we're looking at doing some metal. So again, we just put on lead belcher here, and then applied a bit of null oil to all of those sections, making it look, again, a little bit weathered. And then, of course, our next step is getting out our Runefang steel. Make sure you shake this one really well, folks. So we're applying that to, again, those little spots on the side, kind of like his hearing apparatuses. And there we go. And lastly, we're going to be going over the tubing on his head, so all those wires and things, completely with null oil. So this null oil is, of course, going to sink into all these crevices, saving us a lot of time instead of just traditionally going in there with some black paint. And that will create some shadowed areas for our next step. And don't worry if you make mistakes on the white with the null oil. You can always go back again with some Corax white. So I just did a lens there with the Corax white, and now I'm going back over to piping to make it a little bit cleaner. All right, now it's contrast paint time. So we're putting on some Yandin yellow over those tubes slash piping going towards his head. And then of course we have our second one, which is the achromatic blue being added onto, again, another set of 2 of these pipes. And then we're finishing off with the red. So again, the red is Blood Angels Red, again, another contrast. Great color, goes over really well over the white, and again, adds a little bit of a warmth to this fairly cool model so far in terms of its color. And of course, can't forget the lens with the achromatic blue. Now we have the warp lock bronze being added into a few more of those wires behind his head. And next we have Retributor armor being added as well. And then just going over that with some null oil on, again, those various sections of the metal just to make it pop. And next we got our highlights. So just doing a bit of Corax white on some of those tubes just to add a little bit of value to it. And then did a little mix with the Wazdaka red with Corax white, just like we did with the lips. And we're putting a bit of that on the red tubing to make it stand out a bit more, and going back and correcting it for a little bit more of the Blood Angels red contrast paint. And can't forget the little lens. So it took me a few tries to get that right with the achromatic blue and a little dot of white. There we go. Awesome. So now we have his little gemstone done. His head is now complete. Awesome. Okay, we'll do some stills next. All right, and there we have it, our finished product. So here we have his head in all of its glory. Again, trying to get as much detail and make it look as realistic as possible. Again, highlighting super key with this process. So take your time when you're going through this. And remember to have a very fine detail brush for those eyes and for these small details. Well, until next time, happy painting.